if you come from anything with diet culture, if you've done diets in your past, you feel like you need to do diets, now, just remember diets focus on the what you're eating. They don't focus on the why. And the what doesn't actually matter. The why matters because you have to figure out why you're drawn to certain foods at certain times of the day to build up your trust with your cues, what your body's telling you, starting to practice listening to it. Yes, your body is your guide. We've just lost touch and been taught not to trust it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Sleep Like a Boss podcast. Super excited to have Meredith Ries here today. She is a mental health therapist turned holistic health coach. She still works in a brick and mortar business in Montana as a therapist, but she also helps people online with the topic of emotional eating. And I'm so happy to have you here, Meredith. It's going to be great because I think this topic is for people who struggle with sleep, women in particular, or don't struggle with sleep. I think for women, this is from a health perspective, a big topic that comes up over and over that I think you see a lot of. So welcome to the show. It is great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, so for me, I mean, it started at age 11. I was doing diet after diet after diet, called, chunky as a kid. Those things kind of are something that, stuck with me. By age 15, I was not eating anything. I was anorexic. People were very concerned. I was overexercising. So I was just struggling in my own kind of diet world with what I saw from others and what I was kind of taught. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. So it was the fat-free era and over-exercising and calories matter and, all that. I struggled with anxiety most of my life, and I went into graduate school really struggling with anxiety. And it wasn't, the big piece was, well, just get on medication. That'll fix the anxiety. But I knew that that wasn't the answer. I wanted to understand on a deeper level. I was super anxious, but also my heaviest in graduate school. When I graduated and when I started getting into private practice, I specialized working with women with anxiety. But my clients really taught me amazing things because they came in and a lot of them were also struggling with their weight. They were struggling with their eating habits. They were struggling with these other things. It wasn't just anxiety. And I could relate on the anxiety and then I could relate so much on their eating habits and things because I was also struggling. And what I noticed was as we worked together that when we focused on the anxiety specifically and their emotions and we rerouted some of the thinking and we challenged some of the thought processes, their body changed. And it wasn't because of a diet, it was because they were actually dealing with the emotion first. And that's when I started to really dive into my own work personally. And I started to do my own work on an emotional level. I kicked diets to the side, I stopped doing them. It was scary at first, right? Because that was my control. Diets were always my control. But I decided I don't want to be on medication for the rest of my life. I just have to deal with this anxiety. And I started dealing with the anxiety and physically I started to see a shift in my body. So for me, that's when I started to really want to specialize in this and help women because there's such power in the emotional process and shifting mindset. And there's wonderful things that can happen without all the effort and the restriction and the beating yourself up and the judgment and all that, more on a holistic level when we look at the emotional piece.
Yes, and I think this is so great. Thank you for what you do because I think this is so needed. Can I ask one quick question before we dive into this whole emotional? You were saying something about eating habits. So, when does this all start? Why do we as women often get to this point of disordered eating of some sort? And I did that in my teens as well. I wasn't anorexic, but I think it had people pay close attention. What they have very much seen that what I was doing there was like extreme dieting and not a good idea. And then binging to it, not as extreme, but it was going there. But where does this come from? Like, why does this
Well,
happen?
yeah, I mean, so I'm a therapist and I just really believe that a lot of this comes from childhood. I do a lot of work with attachment theory in my practice, where, just a quick summary, we all have attachment figures growing up. There are parents, there are grandparents, there are neighbors, they're the people that are older than us. And we're scanning as kids, and we're looking for patterns in their behaviors, and we're taking notes with their behaviors. And then we're consuming all of that information, and then we're implementing it as best we can in our life, right? So essentially they're our guide. So I'm a firm believer that a lot of this comes from childhood experiences, what you were taught about food, what you saw with food, and what you felt with food, right? And so if you felt a lot of guilt or made to feel a lot of guilt, then that's a bad food. That makes me feel this awful feeling, so I can't touch that. Right? So we start to kind of have these relationships built throughout the childhood years, and then we get into adult years and we start to understand it more. But most of us don't understand it on a deep level of like, oh, that's from when my aunt called me, chunky. Like that was something that really scarred me, right? But it's really hard to make that connection in our adult world because we're busy with other things. And it's just like, oh gosh, what's my problem? It's just willpower. It's just my willpower. I'm just not strong enough there. And I just need to work on that. I'll try a new diet. So we're kind of just so busy that we look for the quick fixes, and we don't give a lot of attention to what happened in childhood and where some of our patterns actually came from, some of the stories we were told and now actually use in our life.
Yeah, this is quite fascinating. And considering there's so much discussion, social media or the media in general, right, where we talk about um, cultural expectations, body composition expectations, all these kinds of things, right, where you kind of then tend to go that route. It's like, oh yeah, it's the fat-free era. We all need to be skinny and not eat any fat, and that will come from that. And then, but it's so much deeper, and it goes so much further back. Plus, then you have that whatever you're consuming in terms of information, right? That also shapes, I guess, or makes that pressure even bigger.
Yeah, and then you have, the kids, in your grade level, and what your coach says on the sports team. I remember I had to be thin enough to, get the sprints in the right time, right? So I could be the starter on the basketball team. Like, I mean, it's everywhere around us. It's in the magazine at the checkout at the grocery store with my mom when I was a kid. And then it's like my coach saying like, "Hey, you need to be this weight so you can be on the starting team, and we need you here so you can rebound better." It's like it's just everywhere. And then we carry all the expectation with us into our adult world. And yeah, social media, all these things, right? After having kids, you're supposed to like lose the weight in 10 minutes and be back in your jeans that you were in like 20 years ago, right? It's just that it's the mindset, it's our expectations that we see and hear and feel.
And how how do emotions then really come in? Because you've touched on it, you've mentioned a few, but can you explore that concept a little more of, yeah, what really is emotional eating, and how does it happen?
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, I go back to with my background as a therapist, I go back to, I think a lot of it comes from what we were taught to do with our emotions. And it's funny because I just did a reel on that today for Instagram. I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to think about. But it's like, when we were told as kids, most of us, like, hey, just don't be sad. Just feel better. Like, stop worrying. And I remember being told that by people. And it's nice because they're trying to help us, but like we don't just stop worrying. We can't just shut it off. It's not a button. And what we end up doing is we start to notice that, wow, I can't shut this off. This is really big. This is really heavy. So I'm going to go explore different tools on my own to see what will make me feel better. And again, as we're growing up, and even as adults, we can do this, right? If something works and makes us feel less uncomfortable, then we take a note, we take a mental note, and then we do that again. And so many of us have, if we struggle with emotional eating, and I struggled for years and years with that, is I was never taught what an emotion even was. I wasn't taught that they were normal. I wasn't validated, comforted. Nobody empathized with my emotion. I didn't know what to do with it. I was left alone with it. So I taught myself to make myself feel relief with food because that actually worked. And what we do, right, is we take the tool that works and we practice it over and over and over again. And it becomes an automatic response, it becomes a reactive response. So now, as an adult, it's like I feel stress or I feel anxious. Cookies. I'm going to go get the cookies, right? And it's like I'm a ream of cookies in, and I'm like, oh my God, what just happened? Right? Like I don't even remember eating the cookies. And did it help my anxiety? Well, it kind of numbed it a little bit, but it can be practiced for so long and that we don't even notice we do it.
And it is, I'm just thinking about, I just have this picture in my mind when I was little. Yes. And I would say my parents sometimes went to there was definitely a reward thing with like sweet stuff, but there was also sometimes you scrape your knee, it's bleeding really badly, here's a lollipop kind of thing.
Yeah. And we have to remember that, when we have an emotion, the other person that is with us is uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So they need a reactive plan and they give us food because, again, that gets us quiet, that distracts us, that makes our emotions stop. And when our emotion stops, they feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big thing, right? And it's something that you can, there's even nothing almost to me that is like, don't beat yourself up about it, right? You were raised that way and you need to start relearning that somehow, unwire that, untangle that, so you get to the bottom of it. Otherwise, those triggers will always lead back to the learned behavior, right?
Exactly. That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to change it on the deeper level. And that's why diets don't work. I mean, it seems like that's the no-brainer answer, right? I'll just do another diet. I'll restrict, I'll lose weight, calories in, calories out. And it's like, yeah, but if you're an emotional eater, you're eating because of an emotion. You're eating because you've practiced to eat because of your emotion. And yeah, it's all about undoing. But the piece where people get tripped up, and they get tripped up in my office a lot, they get tripped up, the clients I work with online, is you have to feel the discomfort of your past, right? In order to own that, to see your pattern, to have an awareness, so then you can actually start challenging yourself in the present.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think I'm just trying to think about like the people listening and the ladies who were like, I'm burning out, I'm tired, I haven't slept. And oh
I don't
my
have time
God,
for
like,
this.
do you really want? Yes. And I think this is such an important conversation because if we struggle, if we don't get enough sleep, and I don't care if you're giving it all day to everybody else and you're burning out and that's why you're not sleeping, or if there's an underlying issue that you're not sleeping, or you're just, yeah, you're just not giving your body enough time to sleep. If we don't sleep well, we already see that, and you can see it in people, you see it in studies, that if you cut your sleep too short, your biology is messed up the next day, to keep it very simple, and you're already wired for more food because your satiety mechanisms don't work well anymore, and your body needs energy because you haven't rested. So, and that often requires quick energy. That often screams bagel and muffin and brownie and whatnot, right? And talking about the big part that you talk about, the emotional part, when we sleep, and if we sleep long enough, we have more REM sleep. And where we have more REM sleep is where emotional regulation happens. And if we are more emotionally regulated just because we had more sleep, it's already going to be so much easier to make those conscious decisions and go on a journey that will unravel all that. But it's kind of, if you're not sleeping, you're setting yourself up for basically emotional eating, because that's what it is. There's one thing that ticks you up and you're going.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, I mean, sleep is absolutely huge. Like I tell my clients that in my office because I'm like, we have to get that, there's certain things we have to get under control, right? And figure out before I can give you a bunch of things where you're emotionally challenging yourself. Because I never want people to feel failure. Because if the second you feel failure, you're going to be like, nope, I'm done. I'm not doing
Yeah.
that again.
Yeah.
And so we never want to feel failure. So yes, like you're mentioning, there's a step by step, absolute step by step process where you want to do the thing that's really important first. So then you can do the next thing that's really important next. And I would say sleep absolutely needs to happen before you can start challenging emotions.
Yes. And how do I, but to even maybe, because I'm maybe not at that point yet, but how do I distinguish between, am I actually hungry? Or is there some emotional need that needs to be fed? And that's why I'm going to the kitchen and grabbing something.
Yeah. 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 And I always ask just really simple, right? To start thinking about this. I tell people, we envision our whole body as one thing, right? And I say, well, let's envision it different. Think about your head and think about your stomach. Those are two different places in your body. Separate them. And is your mind hungry or is your stomach hungry?
Mm-hmm.
And start challenging that because if you're going to the pantry, ask yourself, did my mind bring me over here? Or is my stomach actually hungry? Right. And there's a few things that you can do to start to shift because there's a lot of differences between the physical hunger and the emotional hunger. But the biggest thing is you have to decipher the difference for yourself, right? Are you physically hungry and you have to get to know internally what's going on? Or are you mentally hungry because there's an emotion driving you to the pantry? And, one of the things that I tell people to do, well, there's three things. I say, how do you feel? Ask yourself, how do I feel in this moment? Right? I feel stressed. I feel burned out. I feel tired. Okay, great. Um, what do you need? Right? Well, I really need 2 more hours of sleep, but a cookie will do. Right? So getting to know that actual need and then asking yourself point blank, are you physically hungry? And that's where you dive in and you check in with your stomach versus your brain being in total control. And so often, especially when we're tired, I remember, I have two kids. I know what sleepless nights are. I know with hormones and all this stuff, trying to get sleep, like I get it. And the last thing I want to do is figure out why I'm eating this bagel, right? It's like, I don't even care. I probably haven't eaten in 2 days because everyone's been up and screaming and someone's sick. I'm just going to eat this thing, right? But again, when you start to feel more balanced with a good night's sleep, then you can start asking yourself these questions. It's not a do it every single day or you fail type of thing. It's a do it when you can, because the more information you can gather around your pattern, then you can start to change it. So I always tell people just gather the information. You don't even have to do anything about it. If you're going to eat the cookies, go ahead and eat them,
Mm-hmm.
but at least know why you're eating them.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think, yeah, I'm just picturing myself like you work and then you had lunch, you work, it's like 2:30 and you're like, am I actually hungry? Let's go downstairs. Let's see what there is in the
Yes.
fridge. And then you're there and you're like, I'm not hungry,
Mhm.
but I have the door open. I'm already looking. I'm seeing something that looks very exciting. So, and then it's, yeah, and that's actually that moment to have that conversation with yourself, right? What's actually happening. And I find, and we talked about this before we hit record, one thing I often find, I think it applies to lots and lots of people, but for me specifically, because I'm not so great with hydration. Like that's one of my big things. I need to drink more water. Um, but it is often that, even that I'm not hungry or something, but my body's getting cortisol's going up because I'm actually dehydrated. My body's starting to get stressed. And then food would be one mechanism to keep that, get that cortisol in check and everything. But it's more the, okay, if I just have a glass of water and wait for 10 minutes, let's see if I'm still hungry. And if I then am actually hungry, then I'm probably actually hungry.
Yeah.
And I'm not just craving something, because all I actually needed was a glass of water. Do you see that too?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, I live it. I walk in the door at 5 o'clock. Everyone's, yelling. It's the witching hour.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to make dinner for the kids. Somebody has like soccer practice. Like, I feel frozen and numb. And sometimes it can be really hard to be like, there's the water filter. Like, just go over and pour a glass of water. It's hard to get over there. But I know that if I do that, it's a great challenge for my body to give it what it needs, check in and see. And again, I think we just look at like, okay, so the days that I do that, it's a big win. The days that I don't, it's not a failure. I just have compassion with myself and say, wow, it was a really emotional time when I walked in at 5 and I didn't get to do the water. I'll do it tomorrow and not
Yeah.
not
And I
beat
think that's
myself up.
important to not beat yourself up about it, but you're also, if you do it once or twice and you see that it works, you don't also need to beat yourself up next time, really, or you don't need to freak out because you're kind of like, oh yeah, I didn't have the water. Well, too bad, my own fault kind of thing. But okay, I know where it comes from. I know why I'm so on edge, and I know why I'm very not good at juggling dinner and kids and everything right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe, I've done this before. I drink a bunch of water in the driveway before
Oh,
I
that's a
even
good
get in
one.
the
Yeah,
house. Like
yeah,
I just chug my water bottle,
yeah,
because I know I'm walking into a tornado.
yeah.
And sometimes that helps. You just feel your control and you get it under control and then you walk into the storm.
Yeah. You can weather it a lot better.
You rather
Talking about that, because like, and we've kind of touched on it a minute ago, but with the not sleeping causing a lot of stress, people being very busy, walking into tornado, how does stress affect emotional eating?
Yeah. Yeah, stress is a big one. Again, I think it's how you've dealt with your stress your whole life, right? You've probably practiced this skill to eat in response to the stress. But, again, we have to look on a deeper level that stress is us feeling lack of control.
Mhm.
Anxiety is us feeling lack of control. And, it feels like there's, kind of a tornado around us. There's a whirlwind happening. We're standing in the middle, and that's what stress is. And we're supposed to get control of everything spinning around us. And we have pressure around trying to get control. And then we have the internal feelings of not having control.
Mhm.
And when you blend the two, we need relief
Mhm.
immediately, right? We don't know what to do. We don't know how to get things under control, and we need something fast. Yeah, it can be really a hard one.
And do you also find, because I often hear clients saying that, and when we work on sleep, we often work on blood sugar regulation because that's a big one also for night wakings. But it's often this, oh yeah, you know what? I was really good all day, kind of with what I ate and stuff. And then came 5 o'clock, I came home from work, and then I just started grabbing whatever is available before I make dinner.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I get it. Like, I get it. But if we set ourselves up, because you were taking that example with drinking the water in the driveway, if we set ourselves up more throughout the day, more continuously, maybe consciously, do we also because maybe can we get emotional eating under control that way a little as well, that we just feed ourselves when we're hungry?
Well, yeah, that's a great point, right? Is hunger cues. And I think that's the piece that we've all been taught how to not use them. We had them as babies, we had them as kids, but I think for me and many of the people I know, many of my clients, we lost touch with those at like age 2 when we started eating a lot more snacks and things. People looked at the clock. The clock became our hunger cues.
Mm-hmm.
And we've lost touch totally with our physical cues. And now we judge ourselves if we're hungry. We have expectations around getting to a certain time before we can eat, and we don't practice using our cues. And so, oftentimes, like you were saying, like, I've been really good today. Well, one, what does good even mean, right? Does that mean you ate like 100 calories, or does that mean you had like 3 meals, right? And somebody has to kind of decipher that for themselves. In diet culture, good means you ate a lot less, right? Usually like that's like good. And the problem with that and us not listening to our hunger cues is oftentimes we don't eat enough during the day. And a lot of people hear this and they're like, yeah, okay, I don't even know what that means. Like eat more, eat enough. I'm gonna gain weight. But it's like, well, no, it's more about like eat enough for your body. Eat enough when your body's hungry and it's telling you it's hungry. It's not about eating enough at 12 o'clock because the clock's set to eat. It's about eating enough for you and tuning into those cues. And I always tell my clients, it's like you have to build trust back with the cues. So that means if you're hungry, you should eat
Yeah.
because you have to start building the trust that, okay, when my body tells me I'm hungry, I'm going to start listening. I can trust it. I'm going to eat. And if you do that, you drink water, right? That's a great idea because most of the time we're dehydrated. And you start looking at your meals during the day and say, like, am I even satisfied? I mean, you and I were talking earlier about how, like, I mean, if you're a parent, I mean, your meals consist of like whatever the kids left on their plate, and then you're running out the door, right? And that could be 3 bites of a hot dog or, a cracker. And then you get home at 5 o'clock and you're
Hungry.
starving and
Yeah.
you're like, what the heck? Why am I so out of control with my food? I ruined it all. It's 5 o'clock. I was doing so good all day. But it's like, yeah, but what did you eat all day? Were you satisfied during the day? Or are you looking for satisfaction now because it's 5 o'clock and you actually have time to get satisfied?
Exactly. I think that's a huge one. And then the other thing, um, which I think sometimes ties into this of not eating enough during the day, but also ties into that emotional piece that you were talking about, is what I often see with moms. But there's actually a term for it. It's called revenge bedtime procrastination. So that means we're not going to bed, even though we know we should be, but everybody else is finally down and quiet. So it's like, no, this is my 90 minutes of whatever it is, Netflix, chocolate, um, to wind down. And that is something that I often hear women struggle with. But there's also so much in there. Why we do that, right? Like there's lots to unpack. But that I think is also something where the emotional part comes in, and you fed yourself maybe a little more consistently throughout the day. Maybe that would be easier for you to say no to the chocolate, but you would probably want to dive into like, why are we even doing that, right? Like what is the chocolate in that moment?
Yeah, there's so many things there. I mean, I do this sometimes, right? Sometimes it can be that I deserve it mindset of like, well, I go
Mhm.
through the day, like
It
everyone's
was a
alive.
hard one. It's my reward.
Yeah, like I get this now, right? But it's like, yeah, but you should get rewards all day long because you're doing great, right? And they don't have to be big and they don't have to be food. But that's where I kind of challenge people of like, well, what are your coping skills? What's your self-care? What are your boundaries, right? And we could talk all day about all these other things that we can, think about and assess before we start wondering why we're eating the chocolate, right? There's many reasons for that. Some could be a habit.
Mhm.
I like sweets after I eat, and I think part of it is like habit,
Mhm.
for me. But that late night, there's just so much there to unpack as to why we do it. And again, I think to keep it very simple, it's like understanding your own why. Why do I feel like I need this right now? What am I trying to get out of this food choice right now in this moment? You could ask yourself those two questions and start to build a relationship with that chocolate so you understand actually why you're eating it versus just grabbing it and eating it.
Yeah, I think it's really this, I had a coach once say to me, she's like, what, and that referred to not necessarily emotional eating, but I think generally in the moment to the emotion. She was like, just ask your body, like actually ask it like it's a person, what do you need from me right now? And really listen. Like, and I think that's the thing that I also had to really relearn to also then trust that intuition, because that's what I kind of totally got away from into the head, in general, the oh, it can actually tell me what it needs if I'm just quiet and I just let it come. And yes, could it be uncomfortable? Yeah. But I think that's really the thing, right? Like just the body's smart. Um
Mhm.
Way better than we are, I think. If we just learn to read it, it can teach us so many things and help us too. That's the other thing, right?
So much. And I think you bring up so many good points. And that's where, if you come from anything with diet culture, if you've done diets in your past, you feel like you need to do diets, now. Just remember diets focus on the what you're eating, they don't focus on the why. And the what doesn't actually matter. The why matters because you have to figure out why you're drawn to certain foods at certain times of the day to build up your trust with your cues, what your body's telling you, starting to practice listening to it. Yes, your body is your guide. We've just lost touch and been taught not to trust it.
Yes. And then I think we get so bombarded with information on social media with all kinds of things that we also don't know what and who to, because we start outsourcing kind of that to experts. And then it's like, but expert A says the opposite of expert B of expert C. So I'm even more confused now and I don't know what to do and think anymore. And I think that's exactly the point that we're at now, where it's like, if we can all just go back to ourselves and start relearning that, because I think that's, at least that was my personal experience. I had to relearn intuition and learn to trust my body, that it makes the right decisions, even though they might not have been, my logical brain would have screamed and said, don't do that. But this, we'll just sleep over it. It's a big decision, just sleep. I'm like, no, like, what does the sleep give me other than losing it? Like, I have made my thought process. No, listen to your gut. And I could, like, that was something I really had to learn again. And I think you can do that. And it's so important when it comes to that eating part, generally being healthy, what is good for you, where are boundaries, what is not good for you. I think with sleep, often, if you get that piece sorted, you'll also sleep better, because a lot of these things are things that are actually interfering with being able
Yeah.
to be calm and just sleep.
Totally. And your emotions for sure. And then I think about all the nights I used to lay awake feeling guilt and shame for, failing at a diet or gaining weight or that my pants were tight. I mean, I would lose sleep over that. I wouldn't sleep. And so there's all this shame and guilt that we also carry into the bed. And we're like, okay, we need to go to sleep. And it's like, yeah, but you're swirling in stuff in the mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you have a few tips for us on how we can start dealing with, or like how we can actively do something about emotional eating during the day, even if we're not ready to get um therapeutic support to unravel everything?
Yeah, the first thing I tell people is to just start being curious about your patterns, right? And it goes back to that, Okay, how do I feel right now in this moment? What am I getting from this food choice in this moment? Right? Just start connecting yourself with the food that you're choosing. That is step number one. Because again, you have to see what you're doing. And then I always tell people, like, okay, so then let's look at, okay, what are your coping skills? What's your self-care? Like, what can you do for 2 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day? Maybe it's a nap. Maybe a nap would really help you, right? And, whatever that thing is, because that's going to help you with stress. That's going to help you sleep better at night because you've taken care of yourself. I mean, there's just so many layers. You're going to make better eating choices. And then I always tell people, like, boundaries, but I think it really starts with just have an awareness around what you're doing. Focus on the little judgment monster in your head that's going to come in and be like, oh, you should not be eating that. What are you doing? And you're going to just be like, okay, I see you. I'm going to move you over here. And I'm just going to focus on my curiosity as to why I'm choosing this food and what I'm feeling about this choice. And then you start to understand on a level and you start to practice the connection, you will start to see yourself challenging it.
Mhm.
You don't need a step-by-step process. You don't need tools. You will just do that because as soon as you bring in the logic and as soon as you bring in that cognitive part of your brain, it will start to challenge the logical part of your brain and or it will start to challenge the emotional part of your brain. The logical will challenge the emotional, and things will shift without a lot of effort. It's just a lot of times when we're tired and when we're emotional eating, the emotional part of our brain is like a tsunami and it's just taken over the logical side.
Right. Thank
Yeah.
you. And if people want to learn more, I know you have a ton of resources that actually all sound very interesting and I'm going to have to check them all out. Where do people do that? Where can we find you?
Yeah, they can just go to my website at Meredith Ries, Ries coaching.com. And it's all on there. There's a bunch of different resources on there. And yeah, there's an eating quiz on there where you can understand a specific emotion that drives you to the cupboard the most. So then you can actually start to notice that specific emotion. There's stuff on there that can be really helpful. So yeah, you can check it out.
Awesome. And we will put everything in the show notes as usual. You're also on Instagram. We'll put your handle there too. So everybody, and she has some fun reels. Your Instagram feed, I find is very entertaining. So we'll go check that out. Meredith, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank you
so
so
much.
much. It was a pleasure. And everybody, thank you for watching and listening. And we'll see you again soon.